Life Stories.
Cricket, once such an obsession, is now so relatively unimportant. And I really felt, well, it was only a little while ago, time had eaten that one again. But what about the business world? I had to get into the business world. I had to reach the top. I had to call the shots. I had to be in the Business Times. I had to do all those things. I've just given that away. How come? And I really felt I got an answer. And the answer was simple. You had to go through all of that to get to here. How can you stand up and tell people there's nothing at the top of the sports world except that I allowed you to play in the greatest cricket side your country ever produced? And how can you talk about the business world if you haven't been there? I got into the ministry. I was in a place called Queenstown with my great friend Trevor Goddard, who also played cricket for South Africa. In fact, he captained South Africa, also an evangelist. And we were doing a 10-day mission. And it so happened that one of the things we had meetings morning, noon, and night. But one of the things that happened was that one of the junior schools invited us to come and speak. Now, I don't mind. I'd love to go to a stadium with 50,000 people. But the greatest challenge is to go to a junior school, to go and talk to little kids with an attention span of 21 seconds. And, you know, there I was. Trevor was older than me. And he said to me, I'm pulling rank. You're going to have to do the job. So I got there. I got to the school, the junior school, the headmaster, lovely Christian. I arrived there and I said to him, tell me, how long do I have to speak this morning? So he said, 30 minutes. I said, sure. I said, that's a long time in front of youngsters. I said, what do you want me to speak about? So he said, the gospel. I want the gospel. So I said, that makes it even longer. So he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, look here, 25 minutes, I'll tell them a few stories because I'm good at that. And then the last 5 minutes, I'll give them the gospel. You know, he looked at me and he said, stories, stories, stories. He said, I am sick of stories. He said, everybody tells stories. Even in the church, they're telling stories. I don't want any stories. I want the gospel. So I said, okay. He said, look, I'll make it easy for you. Get in there, speak 5 minutes, ask question, speak 5 minutes, ask question. That way we'll ensure that they stay awake. He obviously didn't have a lot of confidence in the speaker. Anyway, I get up onto the stage. And there in front of me are 800 little boys. Right in the front row are the little ones, the real little ones. And they're all standing up because the preacher has arrived. I'm on my own. And I'll never forget, I looked at these little guys. It reminded me of my Presbyterian days when once a month, the Sunday school got marched into the main service. We used to sit in the front 2 rows. That's why they're empty these days. But we sat in the front 2 rows. And we were told, just keep your eyes front, don't look left, right. You can't laugh and you can't talk, otherwise the ground will open up and you'll disappear. They never told us that, but we sort of assumed that this was serious business. And I looked, and there was this one little guy, and he was standing there and he looked rather cute. He'd cut his own hair, it was sticking up. He'd done his own tie, the bottom was too long and the top was too short. Anyway, I looked at him, I spoke for 5 minutes and I said to him, son, can I ask you a question? He said, yes, sir. And with that, I asked him a question, a very unfair question, because I needed the break, not him. I said to him, son, can you tell me about Jesus? He said, yes, sir. He said, Jesus is the bestest guy ever. Now, I don't want to argue about the doctrinal value of that statement, but he says it in his little voice, and it doesn't carry too far. So I repeated it to the school. I said, this is what he said. Is there anybody here who agrees with him? And the whole school put up their hands. In the front, the little hands went up straight away. At the back, the older boys first had a team meeting, and then they all put up their hands. Anyway, afterwards, I was having tea with the headmaster, and I said, thank you so much. I came here to bless the kids, but I was really blessed And he said to me, Peter, he said, I give them the gospel every day. He said, but you know, the great tragedy is they leave my school and they go to the high schools of this world. And they get attacked by the humanism and the intellectualism and the peer group pressure. He said they got fancy names for it. The boys start chasing the girls and the girls start chasing the boys. And he said, just the same way as they found out about Father Christmas and threw him away, and the Easter Bunny and threw him away, and the Tooth Fairy and threw it. They've done the same with Jesus. He said they'll argue that they haven't. They go to church, but they've done the same with Jesus. He said, we've all done the same with Jesus. He said, just look around. Look at the marriages. Look at the country. Look at what's going on. He said, Peter, they've done the same with Jesus. And I thought to myself, sure, you're so spot on. Absolutely spot on. I thought of my days. I went to the Grey School in Port Elizabeth. It was a Christian school. You know, there we were taught to have, we were taught that it was biblical to have ambition, set yourself goals, and you play to win. And we did all those things. But you know, we were brought up, and it's good to have ambition and it's good to have a goal. But we weren't brought up with a goal and an ambition. We were brought up with an obsession. We're joined in on the great American dream, not the original one, the latest one, the humanism one, the sort of dream that says you get into the system, you get educated in the system, you climb the ladder of success, and finally one day you get to the top, you make enough money, and you find fame, and then you find peace and fulfillment. Absolute rubbish. Absolute rubbish. It doesn't matter how much money you've made. It doesn't matter how successful or famous you might be. If you haven't found God, you found nothing. They asked Sylvester Stallone about fame. He said, fame is a puff of smoke, a mirage in the desert. He said, you aim, you achieve. A moment or two of exhilaration, dust settles, mirage clears, and all you have. And you know, when Jesus Christ comes into a life, that life changes. If there's no change, there's no Jesus. It's as simple as that. And I remember I even tried to annoy her. And even as I tried to annoy her, more love came out of her. And that was even more annoying. I remember one night delivering a bit of a lecture. I told her that she mustn't try and turn the kids into, as the word I use there, Bible punchers. And then I said that one night something about Jesus. It wasn't too blasphemous. But as I said this about Jesus, she started to cry. Now, you might not think that's strange for a woman, but in 17 years of marriage, I'd never, ever seen her cry. She'd never cried in front of me. Maybe she'd had reason to cry on her own, but never. But when I say crying, I looked in her face and it was just tears running down her cheeks. And, you know, as I looked at her, looked in her face and I looked at those tears, she didn't say a word. But it was almost as if those tears said to me, Peter, you can say anything you like about anyone, but don't you dare say anything about Jesus, my Jesus. She wasn't talking about the Jesus that I'd learnt about at Sunday school. She wasn't talking about the Jesus who technically heads up Christianity. She was talking about Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who had died specially for her. And she was talking about Jesus Christ, who changes lives. She believed with all her heart and soul and mind and strength. She really believed. It wasn't intellectual, it wasn't historical, it wasn't emotional, it wasn't hysterical. It wasn't like I maybe believed like the checks in the post, hoping that it is, but knowing that it might not be. She had an unbelievable hope. It wasn't just a wish, but it was an unshakable confidence. She was absolutely sure of what she hoped for and absolutely certain of what she did not see. It was radical, it was life-changing, and it was highly infectious. And it was the start of Ines becoming something of a significant matriarchal figure in our lives. I looked at her and I knew that something had happened. And I knew that she had met Jesus, but I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want to believe that. And then one night, she was now going to church. One night it was about 6 o'clock. In those days, there was only one television channel. It was about 6 o'clock and she was getting ready to go to church. She actually once asked me if I minded if she went to church, and I know that if I'd said I had, she probably wouldn't have gone. But I said, go, you know, the more you go to church, the more you'll work your way out of this situation. Anyway, this particular Sunday night was just before 6 o'clock, and she was in the bedroom getting ready for her church service because she got a lift at 6:15, and she was busy singing praise songs. She was singing about Jesus. What a wonder you are. And that is the name above every other name. And when you are running from that name particularly ministers to you. Anyway, I was sitting in front of the TV set and a Christian program comes on. 6 o'clock on a Sunday night, that's likely to happen in South Africa. The program introduced, it was going to be a panel discussion, and the subject for the evening was in fact the charismatic movement, the happy clappies, as I would call them. And on the panel was Reinhard Bonker, the well-known evangelist. Bill Chalmers was the chairman. It was a program called Cross Questions. And Reinhard Bonker was there. And one of the guys on the thing was a guy called Stephen Grenfell. I knew him very well from my journalistic days. And there he was. I knew he was an atheist and an agnostic all rolled up into one. He was a television personality. I knew that he was totally anti-Christianity, and more specifically what was going on amongst the charismatics in this day. And I knew that he would have a full go, and he certainly did. He called them self-righteous and presumptuous. And as I listened to him, he was sort of saying everything I'd been saying to my wife, and my wife was busy singing her praise songs in the bedroom. And I thought, well, I'll soon make a difference to that. And I called out to her and I said, Lovey, come listen. And Lovey came and she sat next to me and she watched for about 7 minutes as this guy, Stephen Grenfell, led forth. I managed to keep silent for those 7 minutes. And then when he finished, I said to her, Lovey, I've been telling you the same things. It's your prerogative to believe what you want to believe. But when it's on television, it's the truth. I said, obviously, I'm a prophet in my own land. Anyway, at that time, the car arrived to give her a lift. Off she went to church, and I was left sitting on my own in front of that TV set. Grenfell had dominated the first half, and it now was Reinhard Bonke's opportunity to respond. Reinhard Bonke said afterwards that this guy Grenfell had really annoyed him, and that in his response he hoped that that annoyance hadn't shown through. But as he started to speak, the camera zoomed up to his face, and I never heard a single word that he said. But as I looked at him, his face just shone at me. And as I looked at that face and looked at the face that was shining at me, in a moment of revelation, I realized that what was shining out of him was exactly the same as was shining out of my wife. I realized that the Lord Jesus Christ is for real and does indwell those who love him and those who serve him. And then in the light of that revelation, the camera switched over to Stephen Grenfell, and he was sitting in his chair. And as I looked at him sitting in his chair, he just got uglier and uglier. And then I had this vision. 1 minute.
Life Stories.
Is emptiness. And I wanted to write to him and say, Mr. Rambo, man, you obviously have discovered God's absolute truth, because it doesn't matter how many times Rambo wins. It doesn't matter how much money you make. If you haven't found God, you've found nothing. And finding God does not mean knowing about him. Jesus died on the cross, not that you know about him, you need to know him. My dream was to be a Springbok. My dream was to go to England and beat England in England. I always thought that was the ultimate for us. Beat them in England, because then they won't be able to complain about the umpires. So that was our dream. We'll go to England and beat England in England. And that happened in 1965. In 1965, we came to England, and the series was decided at Trent Bridge. And what a game. We were the heroes after we'd won the series. There at Trent Bridge, telegrams from state president down. The champagne flowed and the beer flowed. And what a party we had. But the next morning, as we got in the bus to drive from Nottingham to London, if we'd been honest with ourselves, we'd have looked each other in the face and said, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? If we had been honest with ourselves. A few weeks later, we arrived at Jan Smuts Airport, the then Jan Smuts Airport. It was the early days of the Boeings. We came back in a South African Airways Boeing. The Boeing was even given the right to come in low and do a victory loop. Fortunately, it just did a victory bank, but it made us all sick in the process. We pulled up in front of the main concourse. There were thousands and thousands of fans. No security problems in those days. We got through and we walked through, backslapping fans, 24 years old, the heroes of our land. But again, if we'd been honest with ourselves, what's the big deal? But we can't be honest with ourselves, because we are the idols and the icons. The young kids aspire to be as like us. And you can't suddenly stand up and say, but sir, there's no clothes on the king. There's nothing. You can't say that. King Solomon, the richest, wisest guy ever, when he looks back at his life and he says, now all has been said, here's the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. And one day every one of us is going to get to that point, that wonderful point of understanding that while we were here on earth, there was only one issue of any consequence, and that was Jesus Christ. Not religion, not Christianity, not the things we've made it, but Jesus Christ. I want to give you a perspective. I was brought up, I think my kids always suggested that their mom and dad were brought up in Victorian times. I certainly wasn't. It wasn't Victorian, because Queen Victoria died a long time before I was born. But we do get what they're trying to say. But, you know, I have to tell you that the way we were brought up, I never ever cheeked my mom or my dad. It just wasn't available to me. We never ever thought, if I'd cheated my mom, I'd have got into so much trouble with my dad. We honored our parents because that was the way we were brought up. As I said, I went to a fancy school, the Grey High School. Fancy schools have Latin mottos. This school had a motto, a triadjuncta in uno, 3 and 1. I used to think that was rugby, cricket, and athletics. I later found out that it was mind, body, and spirit. And I just realized that maybe they did much for the mind and body, but maybe not too much for the spirit. I have a lovely wife, or had a lovely wife, Ines, 4 children, grandchildren, 6 of them. We had, when we played cricket, we were amateurs. So we used to have to take leave to go and play. On a long tour, we used to have to take leave and owe that time back to our firms. But we are known for our cricket, the Pollock family. And as I said to you, the dream, my dream, was to go to England. And we did. We went to England. And we beat England. And it was the start of 5 of the most incredible years in South African cricket history. It's still regarded. That team in 1970 is regarded as one of the greatest cricket sides in the history of the game. I don't know how they work those things out, but so be it. We don't argue with them. We beat Australia 4-0. 4-0. Not just beat them, we beat them 4-0. We were the best cricket side in the world. We'd come from nothing to being the best cricket side in the world. I was considered to be the fastest, if not one of the fastest bowlers in the world. I was ranked number 1 bowler in the world. I played in World 11s. I was honored with life membership with the MCC, life membership with the MCG in Melbourne, life membership with Newlands in South Africa. Honored with all those things. Played hockey, squash, and bowls interprovincially. I confirmed my lunacy by running the Comrades Marathon in South Africa. That's about 90 Ks from Durban to Pietermaritzburg. I also swam the Midmar Mile. I did all those things. When I left school, I went into journalism. There wasn't enough money in journalism. So I had to go into the business world, and I became an executive director of a multi-million company. Business, when I look back at my life, an author, cricket administration, all those things. You look back at your life and you look back at your family and your friends. I can never give back to cricket what it had given to me. But as I look back at that, if someone said to me, you know, Peter, if you had your life all over again, what would you change? I'd say I'd have the same again. Thank you. I'd have the same again. Thank you. Now, I'm not boasting, but I just want to say this. That whole life, a life of success and fame.
Life Stories. Stories.